In December of 1831, a 22-year-old Charles Darwin boarded a small ship, the HMS Beagle. The voyage was supposed to last 2 years. Instead, it stretched into 5 years that would reshape human understanding of life itself. The Beagle was a cramped vessel, only about 90 feet long, with more than 70 men on board. Darwin, prone to chronic seasickness, often spent weeks nauseous and bedridden. Yet whenever they reached land, his spirit awakened. He collected specimens of birds, plants, shells, and fossils with an obsession that baffled his shipmates. He wrote in his journal, "I am like a boy let loose in a shop of wonders." Brazil. In the jungles, Darwin marveled at the overwhelming diversity of insects, plants, and animals. He wrote that no poet could capture the richness of tropical life. Argentina. He uncovered massive fossil bones of extinct giant mammals, giant sloths, and armadillo-like creatures. These fossils hinted at a mystery. Why would such creatures disappear while smaller relatives survived? The Galapagos Islands, 1835. Here, the seeds of evolution were planted. Darwin noticed that mockingbirds and finches differed from island to island. Each had unique beaks adapted to their environment, some for cracking seeds, others for eating insects or cactus. The idea was dangerous but unavoidable. Species might not be fixed, they could change. Darwin didn't shout his discovery. He quietly filled notebooks with sketches, lists, and questions. In one, he wrote 2 haunting words above a sketch of a branching tree. "I think." That simple phrase would ignite a revolution. The voyage that nearly killed him with seasickness gave him the evidence to challenge centuries of belief about creation, nature, and humanity's place in the universe.
When Darwin returned to England in 1836, he carried more than crates of fossils, bird skins, and plants. He carried a question that could destroy the foundations of religion and science alike. Could species change over time? Instead of publishing immediately, Darwin began to write in private notebooks, labeled with letters like B, C, and B. These notebooks were never meant for public eyes. Inside, Darwin sketched his first evolutionary tree. At the top of the page, above a simple branching diagram, he scribbled 2 words, "I think." Those words, small and hesitant, were the birth of evolutionary theory. But Darwin was cautious, even afraid. In 19th century Britain, the belief in the divine creation of species was absolute. Suggesting otherwise was not just controversial, it was dangerous. Blasphemy could ruin reputations, end careers, even invite public hatred. Darwin filled his notebooks with radical ideas. Species are not fixed. Small changes preserved across generations can lead to new forms of life. All living beings, including humans, might share common ancestors. These were dangerous thoughts. Darwin himself called them his species transmutation notebooks. He showed them to almost no one. For nearly 20 years, Darwin kept his theory secret, refining his evidence in silence. His letters reveal a man wrestling with both brilliance and fear. He once confessed to a friend, "It is like confessing to a murder." Darwin knew that publishing too soon could mean the death of his reputation. So he studied quietly, barnacles, pigeons, worms, while his most explosive ideas remained locked in notebooks hidden away. It was a secret that would change the world, waiting in the shadows.
One of the most common phrases people associate with Darwin is survival of the fittest. But here's the twist. Darwin never coined it. The phrase was introduced later by philosopher Herbert Spencer in 1864 after reading Darwin's Origin of Species. Spencer wanted a catchier way to describe natural selection, but in doing so, he distorted Darwin's meaning. Darwin's true idea was natural selection. Individuals in a species show slight variations. Some variations give an advantage in survival and reproduction. Those traits get passed on to the next generation. Over time, these small changes accumulate, creating entirely new species. It wasn't about brute strength or being the biggest predator. It was about adaptability. Darwin himself explained it clearly. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. To test and prove his theory, Darwin conducted meticulous experiments. He bred pigeons, noting how selective breeding could create wildly different forms in just a few generations. He spent 8 years studying barnacles, showing how tiny variations in anatomy could separate species. Even earthworms fascinated him. He discovered their role in soil fertility, proving how even the smallest creatures shape life on Earth. Darwin wasn't obsessed with grand monsters or mighty predators. He was obsessed with the quiet, relentless power of small changes over vast time. That was his genius. He taught the world that life wasn't designed once and for all. Life evolves. And yet, while the science was sound, society twisted his ideas. Survival of the fittest was hijacked to justify racism, imperialism, and social inequality, things Darwin himself never supported. His legacy became both a scientific revolution and a cultural battleground.
Behind Darwin's sharp mind and groundbreaking ideas was a body that seemed to betray him. For much of his adult life, Darwin was chronically ill. He suffered from severe stomach pain, nausea and vomiting, rashes and skin boils, debilitating fatigue, episodes of heart palpitations and panic attacks. Sometimes his illness was so overwhelming that he couldn't leave bed for weeks. Visitors often found him pale, shaking, or sweating profusely. But what caused it? Historians still debate. Some believe Darwin contracted Chagas disease from a bite of a South American bug during the Beagle voyage. Others argue he suffered from psychosomatic illness, his body reacting to the immense stress and anxiety of carrying a theory that could shatter religion and society. Darwin himself seemed to think stress played a role. He often wrote about his heart racing whenever he thought of publishing his theory. He once confessed, "I am not brave enough to endure the storm that awaits." His wife, Emma Darwin, added another layer to his torment. She was deeply religious, terrified that his ideas might condemn his soul. Their marriage was full of love, but also silent conflict. Emma urged him to keep faith. Darwin wrestled with doubt. Yet, ironically, Darwin's illness may have been part of his genius. Forced into long periods of isolation, he spent years quietly observing, analyzing, and writing. The sickness that kept him from the public eye also gave him the solitude to sharpen his ideas. Darwin, fragile in body, became unstoppable in thought. For over 20 years, Darwin had guarded his theory in secret. He collected evidence, raised pigeons, dissected barnacles, filled notebooks, but still hesitated to publish. Fear of backlash kept him silent. Then, in 1858, a letter arrived at Darwin's home. It was from Alfred Russel Wallace, a young naturalist exploring the Malay archipelago. Wallace had been studying butterflies, birds, and tropical creatures, and in a flash of insight during a fever, he had come to the same conclusion as Darwin: species evolve through natural selection. Darwin froze.
Everything he had worked on, everything he had feared to reveal, was written in Wallace's letter in almost the same words. He wrote in despair to a friend, "All my originality, whatever it may amount to, will be smashed." Darwin faced a moral and scientific dilemma. Should he rush to publish and overshadow Wallace, or should he give up his life's work? The solution came through friends like Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, who arranged a compromise. At a meeting of the Linnean Society of London in July 1858, both Wallace's paper and Darwin's unpublished writings were presented together. Wallace, far away in Asia, didn't even know the event was happening. A year later, Darwin finally released his masterpiece, On the Origin of Species, 1859. Wallace admired him and never claimed betrayal. Instead, he became one of Darwin's strongest supporters. But history remembers Darwin as the father of evolution, while Wallace's name faded into the shadows. Darwin himself never forgot the shock of that letter, the moment he realized that if he had hesitated any longer, his place in history might have been lost forever. On November 24, 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Within hours, the first edition of 1,250 copies sold out. The book was not just science, it was dynamite. Darwin laid out his evidence: fossils showing gradual change, geographic distribution of species, domesticated animals proving selection works, the Galapagos finches with their island-specific beaks. But the most radical message was simple: life evolves. All species, including humans, are connected by descent. The response was explosive. Scientists were divided. Some hailed him as a genius, others accused him of destroying science with wild speculation. The church was outraged. Evolution clashed with the biblical story of creation. One bishop scoffed, "If man descended from apes, then may we hope that bishops are descended from angels?" Public debates turned Darwin into both a villain and a hero. Newspapers mocked him with cartoons, showing him as a monkey in a suit. Others celebrated him as the man who freed science from superstition. Even Darwin himself was shocked by the reaction. He had expected criticism, but not the firestorm that followed. He later admitted, "I never dreamed that my book would excite so much attention."
Darwin's Origin of Species was a scientific masterpiece, but society twisted it in ways he never intended. The biggest myth? That Darwin claimed humans came from monkeys. In truth, Darwin wrote something far more profound. Humans and apes share a common ancestor. Over millions of years, that ancestor's descendants split into different evolutionary paths, some leading to chimpanzees, gorillas, and others to us. But Victorian newspapers found it easier and funnier to reduce this to "Darwin says man is descended from a monkey." The caricatures were relentless. Satirical magazines portrayed Darwin with a monkey's body and his trademark beard, making him a public spectacle. Another scandal came from the phrase "survival of the fittest." Though Darwin never coined it, people used it to justify racism, imperialism, and ruthless capitalism, something Darwin himself would have opposed. His actual writings emphasized cooperation and adaptation, not cruelty. The most famous clash happened in 1860 at the Oxford University debate. Bishop Wilberforce mocked Darwin's ideas, asking whether it was through his grandfather or grandmother that he claimed descent from a monkey. Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's fierce defender, nicknamed Darwin's Bulldog, replied, "I would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who uses his position to obscure the truth." The hall erupted. The scandal only fueled the fire. Darwin, too ill to attend, read reports from home. He became a legend, not just as a scientist, but as a symbol of rebellion against old dogmas. But the cost was high. His theory, misinterpreted and weaponized, spread far beyond biology, into politics, religion, and social ideologies he never intended. Darwin's name became more than science. It became a battlefield of ideas.
Charles Darwin was not only fighting a scientific revolution, he was also fighting himself. For more than 20 years, he delayed publishing his theory, not because he lacked evidence, but because he feared what it would unleash. He knew his work could ignite a war between science and religion, and he dreaded the consequences. Darwin's letters reveal the torment. To a colleague, he confessed his theory felt like confessing to a murder. He kept his notebooks locked away, sharing them with only a few trusted friends. He constantly revised, hesitated, and agonized, while the evidence grew undeniable. At the center of his personal struggle was his wife, Emma Darwin. She was deeply religious, and she worried that Charles's ideas might damn his soul. Their letters reveal tender but painful exchanges, Emma pleading for faith, Charles wrestling with doubt. Darwin wasn't an atheist in the modern sense. He described himself as an agnostic, a term coined by his friend Thomas Huxley. He admitted he could not fully believe, but also could not fully deny. The grandeur of nature left him in awe, but he no longer saw divine creation in it. The death of his beloved daughter Annie in 1851 deepened his crisis completely. Darwin wrote, "We have lost the joy of the household and the solace of our old age." After that, belief in a benevolent God was impossible for him. And yet, Darwin never turned into a militant critic of religion. He avoided public attacks on faith, choosing instead to let his evidence speak for itself. He once wrote, "Science has nothing to do with Christ, except insofar as the habit of scientific research makes a man cautious in admitting evidence." Darwin's greatest battle was not just with society, it was with his own heart.
After the storm of Origin of Species, Darwin did not retreat into retirement. Instead, he kept working, tirelessly, obsessively, on the smallest details of life. He studied orchids, showing how their intricate designs were shaped by pollinators. He spent 8 years on barnacles, classifying them in microscopic detail. And in his final years, he turned to one of the most overlooked creatures of all, earthworms. Darwin conducted experiments in his own garden. He placed stones on the soil and waited years, watching how worms slowly buried them. He played music on the piano to see if worms reacted. They didn't. He measured how their endless toil built fertile soil. In 1881, he published The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms. It sold faster than any of his other books. The public laughed at his obsession, but Darwin had the last word. Worms have played a more important part in the history of the world than most persons would at first suppose. By then, Darwin was frail, still plagued by illness. On April 19, 1882, he died at his home in Down House, surrounded by family. Though he had drifted away from traditional faith, his burial was remarkable. Charles Darwin was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, beside Sir Isaac Newton. The man who once feared publishing his theory would destroy him was now honored as one of history's greatest minds. Darwin's legacy is everywhere, in genetics, medicine, ecology, and our very understanding of life. His simple idea that small changes over vast stretches of time create all the complexity of the living world reshaped science forever. Even today, scientists continue to build on his foundation. His vision of life's endless forms, most beautiful, remains one of the most profound ideas ever conceived by the human mind.
Darwin was not a fiery speaker, nor a man of dramatic gestures. But in his writings and private notes, he left behind words that continue to inspire, not just scientists, but anyone searching for truth. Here are some of his most powerful lines. On adaptability. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. On humility. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. On patience and discovery. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. On science and belief. Science has nothing to do with Christ, except insofar as the habit of scientific research makes a man cautious in admitting evidence. On life's beauty. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. These words reveal Darwin not only as a scientist, but as a philosopher, a man who transformed our view of existence, yet never lost his sense of wonder. His greatest gift was not just the theory of evolution, but the reminder that curiosity, patience, and courage to face uncomfortable truths can change the world.